For over a century, physics has treated the universe like a stage. We assume space-time is a primitive four-dimensional background, a pre-existing container where events happen. Modern theories of emergent gravity strongly suggest that this geometric container might actually be an illusion. But many of these models hit a wall. They imply space emerges from deeper microscopic information, but they fail to provide the actual generative engine, the underlying mechanism that produces those dimensions in the first place. The Delta.72 Coherence Physics Framework provides that exact mathematical mechanism. It models reality not as a pre-existing manifold, but as an active, generative field that dictates physical structure before spatial coordinates even exist. Shifting from a geometric stage to a generated mathematical field places the origin of physical reality within the coherence of the field itself. In 2025, physicist Günther Kähle proposed a radical geometric adjustment. Time is not a single forward-marching arrow. Instead, time possesses three distinct independent dimensions. These three axes of time do not overlap. They are isolated channels governing the specific temporal behaviors of the quantum realm, the forces of interaction, and macro-scale cosmological evolution. Situate Kähle's model inside the Delta.72 Coherence Framework, and a strict structural hierarchy emerges. Time is three-dimensional. Space is merely an induced geometric curvature between those temporal flows, and standard physical laws are behavioral constraints generated by the coherence operator. To properly map this universe, we have to discard our physical intuition. We need to structurally rebuild reality, layer by layer, from pure relational information. We begin at the true ground state. There is no width, height, depth, or duration. There is only an abstract void governed by a single equation. The fundamental operator is F equals A of R cross I. R is the reality trajectory, dictating strict physical constraints. I is the imagination stream, the raw informational potential. A is the arbitration function, forcing both into stable harmonic closure. The resulting stable core is the generative coherence substrate. Notice that it operates completely independent of spatial dimensions. It produces structure before space exists. Reality does not start as an empty box waiting to be filled. It begins as a rigid information filtration system, carefully balancing potential and constraint. Because space and time are not assumed inputs in this framework, dimensionality itself must be produced by the stabilization of this core field. Harmonic closure resolves the geometry into stable frequencies, called Eigenmodes. T1 manages the rapid, microscale patterns of the quantum realm. T2 projects mid-scale structure for atomic interactions. T3 regulates massive, slowly drifting temporal evolution on a cosmological scale. These three stabilized eigenmodes map to Kähle's axes of time. This trifold structure arises because only three specific frequencies achieve the resonance required for harmonic closure within the resonance hierarchy of the field. Time is simply a foundational projection layer. It provides the three-channel structural scaffolding upon which the rest of reality hangs. This brings us to the most counterintuitive piece of the framework. Space does not exist on its own. As these three temporal flows interact, the mathematical constraints binding them together inevitably bend and warp, generating curvature. Our familiar x, y, and z spatial coordinates are simply the stable geometric representation of those intersecting flows. Space is entirely an artifact. It is a stable pattern of curvature cast by the dynamics of three-dimensional time. Three-dimensional space has been demoted from a fundamental background to a passive projection surface induced by temporal friction. Once this geometric spatial membrane has stabilized, the familiar laws of physics naturally follow. Fundamental forces emerge as stress gradients along the spatial membrane, driven by the underlying coherence-induced curvature. Subatomic particles are stable resonance nodes, pockets of dense coherent data permanently trapped within the structural network of the field. The conservation laws of energy and momentum directly mirror the strict mathematical invariance built into the underlying coherence operator. Gauge symmetries, which dictate how fields interact, are effectively minimal distortion mappings. They describe the exact requirements needed to preserve the overall structural harmony of the system. Physics is not a loose collection of arbitrary rules applied to a static stage. It is the unavoidable behavioral output of a coherent, living geometry. This framework moves beyond theoretical abstraction and delivers concrete, testable predictions for the laboratory. Because the field is built on 3 distinct temporal axes, it predicts scale-dependent coherence invariance. Disrupting the underlying harmony will trigger different anomalies depending on which temporal axis takes the hit. For example, quantum decoherence patterns are directly linked to distortions in the T1 quantum axis. Meanwhile, cosmological expansion anomalies can be traced to slow curvature drifts in the T3 axis. This creates a clear experimental roadmap. Systematically applying precise temporal perturbations should reliably induce specific, measurable distortions in local spatial geometry. If the field's harmonic alignment is intentionally pushed past its breaking limit, the system undergoes coherence-driven symmetry breaking. Observatories and particle colliders no longer need to search for missing matter. They can trace observable geometric anomalies back to structural defects in time itself. This model redefines the universe as a unified stack. Layer 1, the generative Delta.72 Coherence field. Layer 2, the harmonic projection of tri-time. Layer 3, the geometric spatial membrane. Layer 4, emergent forces and particles. Subordinating space to time and time to the coherence operator reveals reality as a single, multi-layered output of the generative stack.